Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alpine Intel's Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss the property loss topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Chris Nichols, a senior account manager here on Alpine Intel's sales team. So, as you may already know, Alpine Intel is an industry leader in property assessments and innovation across a broad range of topics, and including our operating brands HVACI, Strike Check, National Fire Experts, Donan Engineering, and the Component Testing Laboratory. You can always find more information about those services and additional resources at our website, which is alpineintel.com, and it's also going to be linked in the show notes. As always, we're here to share some key points with insurance professionals about a variety of property topics, including today's focus, which is plumbing losses and subrogation opportunities. So a quick disclaimer before we get started. We typically talk today in general engineering and insurance terms. Obviously, each property failure comes with its own set of circumstances, which is why it's so important to get an assessment to make sure you have the facts for your claims. Today, I am very excited to be joined by professional engineer and master plumber Adrian France, along with Alpine Intel's Chief Operations Officer David Riggs. Welcome to you both.
Welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Chris.
All right. Well, Adrian, let's start with you now. You work in Alpine Intel's Component Testing Laboratory inspecting failed plumbing products. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience with these products?
Well, thank you, Chris. Yes, my name is Adrian France. I am a licensed professional engineer with over 23 years of engineering experience. Some of my previous experience prior included working in the utility and sump pump industries. I'm also a licensed master plumber, which that's well suited for obviously looking at plumbing components. I've been working in the Donan Component Testing Laboratory for over 14 years, and my responsibility as a senior forensic engineer is cause failure analysis of water loss appliances and components.
Awesome. And David, you're Alpine Intel's Chief Operations Officer now, but you also have a lot of experience with subrogation, including running the component testing lab. Would you mind going into your background a little bit as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a mechanical engineer by trade. Started in the component testing lab over about 18 years ago. And, running the lab and going through that aspect of it actually set us up for a lot of different opportunities and abilities to help our customers achieve what they were trying to do. And where that comes into play is that over the years, there was a lot of different subrogation programs. Each company had their own unique way of doing that. Also, a lot of national law firms that would focus in on property subrogation. And whenever you would run these types of programs, you would need partnership or support, I would say, from people who could handle the logistics of it and also the processing. So there's a whole evidence management aspect of how do you collect, how do you make sure that you have proper chain of custody and all these other sorts of things, and then also have the wide range of expertise and but have specialization in that to be able to look at the different types of projects and handle large volumes of them. So when you would set these programs up, if they would be nationwide, we were a vendor of theirs that would be able to handle those large volumes and be able to process those. So I worked with numerous different insurance companies and law firms, setting up those programs over the years, doing things for on the plaintiff side and then also on the defense side, whether it's in that case product liability cases. So really, going kind of full circle around what those look like. But we had a really unique opportunity due to our ability to really process high volumes of products and doing inspections and being able to really solve that logistics piece associated with it. So that's a little bit of my background and how I got involved with subrogation.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you to the both of you for being here, and our listeners are in good hands with the both of you here today. So, David, we'll stay with you and kind of toss the first question over to you. So, When I started at Alpine Intel about a year ago, I admittedly had zero clue as to what subrogation was. So after some pretty exhaustive and intense Googling, I finally found an answer, probably a lot of answers on what subrogation was. So for the people who are listening today that may be in the same boat that I was, can you explain exactly what subrogation is?
Yeah, so I'll tailor it solely to really property insurance. So when you in the world of property insurance, for covered losses, something that is a covered peril and a loss, the insurance company has a certain amount of exposure associated with that. So the severity of that claim, if there's another party that's responsible for that failure or that loss, then the responsible party can be held accountable for that, and the insurance company can try to recoup the money that they paid out for that loss. And so that's a very basic general term of it. But really, again, to kind of recap, there's a responsible party for whatever the loss might be. That party can be held accountable for that. And so that's the overall subrogation process.
Awesome. Is there a certain percentage of claims that go to subrogation, or do you have those numbers, or anecdotally, just kind of curious how many do pursue subrogation?
It's a very small number, to be honest. If you talk to depending on which department you're talking to at an insurance company, a lot of people don't like subrogation because they kind of view it as a lot of added work necessarily. And not only that, but it's added work with there's a certain level of uncertainty associated with it, right? So it's like, hey, if I do all this work, we might get some money back on this, or we might be able to get this. And so that's where a lot of questions really come into play that we receive is people trying to figure out, is this worth my time? Should I be doing this sort of thing and that sort of thing? And so there's a lot of this uncertainty, and a lot of it really comes into. And now all insurance companies can be structured different ways, but a lot of them will have your field adjusters or your desk adjusters. A lot of them are tasked with the responsibility of identifying, hey, there is a subrogation opportunity here. And a lot of people do that in different ways. There can be different, what they call trigger points for that, whether it's something of concern like SIU might get involved, or it's getting to a certain threshold for severity or the cost of the claim. Or it could just be that, hey, based on other certain factors, it can, pose that we want to investigate this and there might be a subrogation opportunity. But these frontline folks of the field adjusters or desk adjusters or whatever it might be, their primary focus is the insured, right? As it should be. They're like, the insured has a failure. We want to focus on trying to get them back to normal as quickly as possible. What we're talking about today is really water losses. And so their home or their house is flooded, and they want to be able to get that back to normal as quickly as possible. And what are the costs and the repairs and all that sort of thing to get that moving through. Subrogation is usually a latter thought. It doesn't necessarily come right away, and they don't do it all the time. And then you have another department, maybe if they have an in-house subrogation department. Those professionals, they focus on subrogation all the time. But there's usually a challenge between the two departments to make sure that information is exchanged in an appropriate way, and that they have the knowledge of what they should be going after or pursuing with an investigation, or at least seeing if there's anything, what's the cause of failure associated with that, and making sure that the two groups are aligned with what they're trying to do.
And you use the example of somebody's house flooding. Is it primarily residential claims that pursue, or do we see a decent amount of commercial claims come through subrogation?
So there's both. When you look at just the frequency of failure, there's more houses, right? So there's more houses, there's more failures associated with residential properties than there's commercial properties. And so for that reason, the vast majority of failures associated with this from a frequency standpoint will be associated with a residential property. Now, when you're talking about pursuing or people having an interest in looking at subrogation, a lot of times commercial gets focused on just due to the severity. And so you can have, if you have a commercial establishment that has a loss or something like that, they might have a loss of revenue and various other things that come into play that drastically increases the cost of the claim. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, looking back, David, I should have just called you directly when trying to find out what subrogation is. I'm going to definitely pass that along to future coworkers. Just connect with David. He's got a great explanation for you. So, Adrian, we'll hop over to you for the next question. So, when you receive a product in to test at the lab, is it always possible to tell what happened based on the evidence that you receive?
That's a good question, Chris. That's a double-fold one. So, really, if we keep in mind, really my role as being an expert is to be third-party, completely independent. I deliver my opinion associated with the cause failure analysis. Not only do I delve into the facts, but then I also need to use my past experiences in order to really be able to render an opinion about the evidence that I'm looking at. And I'll tell you, we get a varied types of projects associated with water loss and fire loss here at the CTL. And this industry by no means is it small. I mean, it's a $15 billion industry per year. So you can imagine the plethora of different types of water loss projects that we might see. For the most part, during my first phase, when I'm looking at the evidence and it first comes into my facility, I'm going to be looking for the three most common, which is a manufacturer's defect, an installation error, or abuse. But by no means does that necessarily pigeonhole me only to those kinds of results. There's always the potential for maybe I need destructive testing. Maybe I can't determine it during the non-destructive phase. Maybe, especially today when here in sunny Louisville, but our high today, I think, is probably going to be in the teens. You also have to worry about those things like freezing. Freezing is a very, very large one. And I give it probably another month from now. Once we start getting to the spring, we're going to get a large amount here at the lab associated with freezing failures. And that's always a good one to really, part of my job too is training adjusters. And when you can show them with reports, or you can talk to them on the phone, and then you can start to teach them, just like what David was talking about before, there is some uncertainty initially, but then as we start to grow in our relationship with each other, then you start to recognize those things like freezing failures. And to be honest with you, if I didn't get any freezing failures in, but then because of that, I was able to, help the adjuster, train the adjuster. When do we see freezing failures? That'd be great. It'd be a win-win. And that's really what all this is about, is, trying to be a third-party person and just let people know, hey, really what happened here? And then also, I don't want to let this not be said too, is quite often too, there's also the combination of every single result that I just gave you. A lot of times, and probably the vast majority of the time, it is typically maybe that one type of failure. A good example is manufacturing defects where you have an assembly line. Quite often they don't make one mistake one time. Sometimes they make the mistake over and over and over and over again. And that's the part about the lab where we typically do see similarities. And then we're able to evaluate them. But you also have the combination of, which you really have to keep your eyes for. And sometimes it's various things working together that then does indeed result with the water loss, which can be unfortunate. And then one of the key things really in order to dive down into some of these failures, don't get me wrong, some of them are simple. Some of them, I probably could get them with a couple photographs, right? I mean, they can be extremely easy. Others, yeah, sometimes they're a pickle. Man, they can be tough. They can pull out all kind of tools that you then need to have. And that's the nice part about having the lab, is the CTL really does have those kind of tools in order to be delved deep into some of these kind of failures. We have an X-ray machine, which is great. vast majority of the time, it's used for fire loss items when you get your big glob of plastic. And then you might ask yourself, what in the world is this big old glob? X-ray machine's great. You pop it in there. X-ray machine gives you everything that's metal that's going to shine on through. Obviously, you hope that some of the stuff is maybe in its still location. If it's moved a lot, then it can become more difficult. But that's one of the nice things about having the X-ray machine, and it's very, very useful here. We have a scanning electron microscope, SEM for short, and it has a EDS package on it, which is an energy dispersive X-ray spectroscopy. Both of these tools are great and be able to really look to a microscopic scale. I mean, you can get up to 30,000 meg if you have the right kind of metal component that you're putting in the SEM. With plastic components, you know, maybe we're talking 1,000 meg, 1,500 meg. I mean, you're talking really powerful piece of equipment that's able to really delve down into the materials. When you're looking for material deficiencies, when you're looking for fracture surfaces, how do I analyze this fracture surface to figure out not only which way was the fracture going, but at what rate? Was it going fast? Was it going slow? Those are the tools that you really can use. And then with the EDS, you'll be able to know, hey, did they use the right formula when they were actually putting maybe these brass components together? And that's a good example of where EDS is a powerful tool and helps us out tremendously. We have a lot of other tools that we indeed do use. Pressure tester is a very common one. The first thing everybody always wonders is, hey, is this failure associated with overpressurization? And absolutely, that's an important factor. And the pressure tester, don't get me wrong, it's not the most beautiful thing on the planet, but I wouldn't trade it for anything that I can speak of because I've used it so many times. And I'll tell you what, a wonderful, wonderful tool. I really appreciate it. We also recreate freezing. We can even do, and this is amazing, we don't have to wait for days like January, like today, in order to recreate freezing. We have freezing testers that we can use in July and August, thank goodness, when the weather gets a little bit warmer, and that way we just don't have to, you know, put them out the door in order to freeze stuff. We also got stereo microscopes. That's a very, very common tool that we use. And we have a lot of polishers, a lot of mounters, ultrasonic cleaners. I mean, there's just a lot of really good tools that we use with our day-to-day analysis in order to, you know, figure out what's going on here. What's the problem and why did it happen?
Sure. Well, I think I need to book a flight to Louisville and check this lab out. It sounds like you do have a lot of very cool and very important and valuable tools for really any situation. To go back to something you had said about non-destructive versus destructive testing, again, anecdotally, but are most able to be looked at in a non-destructive way, or do you get a certain percent that you just go, hey, we've got to kind of take this thing apart, or we've got to do some destructive testing at this point? Is there kind of a split between non-destructive and destructive?
Well, you know, it's funny you bring that up, Chris, because actually I remember when David did that research, was it like 18, 17? I can't remember.
It's been a while.
It's been a while. It was about 6 or 7 years ago. And David, you help me out here if I'm getting it wrong. But I think it was the vast majority is you determine it during the non-destructive phase. Mm-hmm. And really, was it something like 20, 25%? I don't know the exact number. You know a lot better than I do.
Yeah, it was, you know, around 20%, plus or minus probably 5%. Might need some additional destructive testing. And really, a lot of that depends on the type of product. You know, some products, depending on their nature and where the failure mechanism occurs, really deems that, you know, we might have to open something up or do something that might be, you know, deemed destructive. And so we want all parties there to make sure that we don't have any kind of, you know, spoliation issues or anything like that, or at least give everybody the opportunity to witness what's going on. So, but again, that could, you know, vary from one to the next.
Sure. I still can't get the image of the plastic blob in the X-ray machine out of my head. I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time. So, well, David, we'll stick with you here for our next question. Can you speak a little bit to what steps an adjuster can take to ensure that evidence doesn't get compromised, and really why that matters so much in subrogation?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, if you think about kind of the life cycle of a plumbing failure, we'll say, is that, you know, if you when the insured notices that there's, water all over the place and they're like, hey, I need to get something done here, usually the first person out is the restoration or water mitigation company. So they're going to come, make sure the water's shut off, make sure that they want to start drying out the property. And then at some point, somebody's going to come in, make sure that they remove out, everything that's wet. They could be carpet, they could be insulation, they could be cutting drywall out, up the wall to a certain point, removing baseboards, and really kind of trying to get all the moisture levels back down to industry standards of where they want to get it. During that time, a lot of insurance professionals won't go out to the scene until it's dry. They kind of want to see what's the end state, how much repair work do we need to do, and all that sort of thing. And that can vary based off of the company or the size of a loss. But that time frame between the two, without anybody really taking interest into the actual failure of the or the issue at hand, whether that's a product failure or just somebody leaving something on, or a maintenance issue or whatever it might be, leaves room for some error. So, a restoration company might come in and say, hey, this part's bad. We need to cut that out, put a new part in. And so the evidence could get lost, could get, thrown away or discarded or whatever else it might be. And so it's really critical to make sure that, all parties that are on site and working know that, hey, any kind of failed components or anything like that, we want to make sure that they don't get altered or changed or modified in any which way, and that we can collect that. And so with that, if it's something small, we basically want to have proper chain of custody so that you know exactly where it goes from and how it gets transported from one location to another. You can use traceable means, as long as you use shipping that has tracking numbers and things like that. So small packages are relatively easy. And the lab tries to help out with that. We have, services that will coordinate that and handle all that for you. But the more difficult ones are the larger items. If you have a water heater or a washing machine or dishwasher, which are all very common failures or common products that we get, is that, how do you pick that up? A lot of people want to ship it via, a freight carrier, but, most people don't have loading docks in their front door. And so how do you package that? How do you get it there and all that sort of thing? And I would say, having done it for a really long time, there's not many transportation, or not many, there's none. There's no transportation vendors out there that are well equipped to be able to handle evidence. So they don't know, what's the criteria of this and what's the safeguards that we have to have in place. And not only do they know that at a macro level, like the organization, they also have to know that on each individual level. Because if I have just a warehouse personnel that's out there and they're trying to strap something to a skid, or they're trying to, just move something, they view it as this is a broken piece of whatever. And they don't know the care and the handling that you have to go through to make sure that that's the case. And so what we ended up doing was we created our own logistics company. So we call it Loss Logistics. It's actually a team of mostly W-2 personnel. So we have W-2 drivers. They go across all over the country collecting evidence. And that is their sole job, is just to handle evidence. And so we're able to do this at a very high level. Not only are they professionals in that, but I would say we handle more evidence than anybody else. And because of that, they have a high volume and know how to handle various types of product failures or evidence failures or whatever that is, from large to small. I mean, we've moved, vehicles and bicycles and washing machines and dishwashers, and, just the common nature of knowing how to look at something a certain way to make sure that it doesn't get altered or changed is unique. It's learning from experience, or seeing, learning from other people's experiences. So simple things like when we move dishwashers, we make sure that they're on their backs versus, making sure that they're not, in another orientation, because it's just more stable that way. And so there's a lot of different things that we can do to try to move that through. So, as you notice that, you go through the life cycle, that product has to get collected, preserved. That's step number one. Then it comes in the lab. We make sure that we track everything that comes through. We do failure analysis on that in the lab. That is what component testing lab does, is failure analysis. We don't pursue subrogation. We don't have we don't get anything one way or another. We just make sure that we can collect the evidence, make sure that gets preserved, make sure that we give an unbiased evaluation of what that failure mode is, and proceed on from there. So we would then do the investigation, write the report, and then send that on. Our customers can then use that evaluation to see what they want to do with their case, whether they want to continue to pursue it, which might result in a destructive exam, or might result in a joint study with the other parties, and or evidence storage, or shipping the evidence to another location. Beyond that, if it continues to go, the other thing we have is that the lab is all full of professional engineers, and they all have their own specialties in the different types of areas. And so if you have a loss that goes to litigation, or just goes down that path a little bit, and you have depositions or trial or whatever else, we're equipped to be able to support you with that. And so a lot of our experts have been through trials and depositions and all that sort of experience. And so we're there to be able to support them in that effort as well, if that's what they deem is needed.
Sure. And I would imagine if something goes to litigation, it is certainly a good thing to be able to prove that chain of custody, and that from point A to point B, it went undisruptive, and one person handled it, and it wasn't, handed off to this carrier and then this carrier. So I'm sure that's pretty handy in litigation as well.
Oh, it's absolutely table stakes. And, when people ask about it, it's not only that, but like we have, we scan everything as it moves. And so not only we know who takes it, but we know the exact time and date, and everything else can provide a complete log from beginning to end. And so it's quite exhaustive. We've been doing this for, over 18 years, this exact thing. And so we have definitely refined the process over the years.
Sure. So I know today's episode is kind of focused more on plumbing losses, water losses, but how would subrogation on a water loss differ from other subrogations, such as, say, a fire loss?
Yeah, no, thanks. I'll take that one. There's a lot of different, I'll first talk about maybe a fire loss. So a fire loss, you often have a scene investigation tied up into it, because you have to determine where the origin of the loss is. And then so kind of once you have the origin, you kind of say, hey, okay, well, what are the potential ignition sources in that area of origin? And then we want to see, what are kind of some possibility of causation there. And when you have that, so you have a scene investigation tied up into it, and then the other thing you have is what makes fire losses more challenging is that the evidence can be consumed in the fire. And so there's a lot of aspects associated with that. What makes it easier, or why people tend to pursue subrogation a lot on fire losses, is because, or one of the reasons they might get investigated, is just because of the severity of the claim. So an average fire loss is about $70,000 to $80,000. The average severity of a interior water loss is about $12,000, $10,000 to $12,000. And so if I'm looking at just the economics of the claim on a $10,000 to $12,000 water loss, I don't want to spend enormous amounts of money investigating anything, pursuing any type of subrogation case. I might have legal fees, I've got processing fees, and all this other, and just time associated with things. And so what's my return on that investment if I'm in the eyes of a subrogation professional? And then on the flip side of a fire investigation, if it's $70,000, well, I can maybe make a case financially that we want to spend some money to kind of pursue this and check it out. Now, the frequency of fire losses is much lower than the frequency of water losses, though. And so, yes, you have higher severity. Water losses have lower severity. The frequency of water losses is much higher than the frequency of fire losses. And so what most people don't know is that next to storm damage, hail and wind, the next category for frequency of property damage is associated interior water loss. And so what's unique about that is that, or the luxuries, I guess I could say, about interior water loss relative to fire losses, is that I always say the origin of the loss is known. it's where the water's springing out, right? And the other thing that you can do that makes it easier is that I can usually remove that evidence and collect it without occurring where the leak occurred. We can ship that, transport it to the lab. They can recreate the failure, confirm that we have the right pieces of evidence, and then complete failure analysis associated with that. And so that ability to logistically transport, the ability to confirm that with and do the failure analysis in a single location allows for a few different things. One, it allows for a centralization of knowledge with our experts in our that we have in the field. You know, these guys that are in the lab, they will look at hundreds of failures every year as that goes through. And so they are a true failure experts on these products and how they fail and all the little nuances associated with those. I mean, they will see things that, oh, well, if you have this, you know, this that causes about this. And it's a certain feature or characteristic, a small little, like the stiffness of a product, or, you know, how it may be discolored or anything like that. And they know all these things and what happens to all that. Whereas if you're to use, say, a local vendor that's kind of an engineer that's a jack of all trades, that's your guy you send out whenever you have any kind of product investigation in a home or something like that, might be the first time that they look at something. And so for them to really kind of understand that, they might have to spend hours and hours and hours trying to figure out what it is. Whereas while we'll spend hours and hours and hours looking at multiple different product failures. And so we can spend that time and that research and that investigation for that specific product failure, and then apply it to numerous failures that come through. And so that's one of the benefits of water loss, is that you can just do it more economically. And because you can do it more economically, it also allows you to create what I mentioned before, is programs around that. And so carriers, for them to be, a lot of times what they found was, hey, if we're going to pursue these, we kind of need to group these together so that we can pursue them, and it makes it worth our while kind of going after them. And so we were kind of the expert and the vendor that supported their logistics on these mass tort cases. So various carriers had mass tort cases. A mass tort case is like a grouping of the same product that all failed exactly the same way, and you put those together. And so we were able to support that, the forensic analysis of that, and then also all the logistics associated with that, and really kind of give some insight into how they should necessarily go about that, and more so from the product characteristics. So, you know, when we would look at that, we would look at, okay, why did this thing fail? Was it a one-off type failure, or is it something that was more related to an overall design or manufacturing issue, which would, as Adrian was talking about, repeat itself multiple times on multiple different products? And then we would look at, well, is that something that's within that the manufacturer has identified and already remediated, and therefore the frequency of those failures is going to be going down, right? So they're replacing those products in the marketplace as they continue to phase themselves out, or is it something that's new, a new product that's out there and it's going to continue to go? And so we would communicate those aspects to our customers, and then in that fashion, that would equip them to make the decisions that they wanted to do. You know, how would they devote their efforts into what they were trying to do, and that sort of thing, you know, one way or another. On the flip side, from the defense side of things, we would work for various manufacturers, and we would see such a high volume of things coming in, we would be able to help them figure out, you know, do you have warranty claims that are coming through that could end up in product liability claims? You know, a lot of warranty claims might only happen in the first year or two or certain things like that. And so, but they still have liability for several years beyond that. And so we would help them try to figure out, you know, what's the extent of this and what's going on. And then it was kind of like a reverse or another version of subrogation, I guess, is that manufacturer would hire us, and then they would then take that information and try to renegotiate their contract with their vendors and say, hey, we need you to do this because, you know, this is what we're seeing on a massive scale. And you would see that those same vendors, they would not only apply to just one component, but unlike appliances, it's the same vendors that service all the different manufacturers. And so you'd have one issue here that would hit one brand, or one supplier would have an issue and it could hit, 3 or 4 different manufacturers of appliances. And so we would be able to have that visibility that other people wouldn't. Each manufacturer looks at their own product, whereas the lab would look at all the products and be able to be that common denominator across the board.
Sure. And you made a great point too with us being around for 18 plus years, right? We've got a massive database of information and past inspections to refer to be more efficient in our investigations and things like that. So no, that's great. Adrian, back to you. I kind of want to dive into your day, in the lab, things you see, and just kind of, I guess to ask the first question, what are some plumbing conditions that are commonly seen at the lab?
Well, Chris, so we see, I typically I'm a mechanical engineer, so I work a lot with the water loss side of items. And we'll see a lot of things like water supply lines, dishwashers, water heaters. We see a lot of appliances, water filters, faucets, as you can imagine, all of those basically items in a residence. We also do commercial, don't get me wrong. But really, when you think of the bulk of it, it's a lot of items in a residence setting that basically has anything to do with water. And I'm going to piggyback off of some of the stuff that David was talking about. So if you think of all of these items, not the one-offs, but if you think of the items that we were seeing repetitiously, over and over again, I like to think of it as an upside down bathtub curve. So as you can imagine, the item, it starts off, maybe the volume is slightly slow, but then for whatever reason, let's say it's maybe a time factor or a in contact with a something kind of factor. But then in the lab here, then it just starts to take off. And, at that point, we see an increase in volume, and that's when we start realizing, okay, there's definitely something going on here. And that's when all the research happens. And that's the part about this job I really enjoy myself too, is not, there is some repetition, but there's a lot of new stuff that I'm learning whenever these new items and products come in. And then eventually you get to a point where maybe it plateaus and you're still getting volume associated with it, but it's really just hit the maximum amount that you're going to get associated with these products. A good example would be toilet supply risers. The valve that sticks out outside of your wall in your home, you have a water supply line that threads then into that valve. It comes up and then it connects to your toilet underneath the toilet tank. That one, for a long time, if we go with that bathtub curve I was just talking about, that one's actually, it's on the slope going down. And what happened was, and it was very interesting, it's not like there was necessarily one manufacturer that was having an issue. It was basically a lot of potentially, maybe these manufacturers were copying each other. Trying to think of exactly what they were going through, I don't know, but I can tell you what the end result was. And it was basically the industry as a whole basically learning how to make these components and make these components correctly. And, that's a part of us here really helping the whole industry move forward. We're kind of, we're the checks and balances here. We're here to make sure that, not only the manufacturers do it well, not only installers do it well, but really, what's going on with the industry. Now, that one itself, currently, it's really going down on the bottom of that bathtub curve, and we don't necessarily see nearly as much volume associated with it. But just like anything in life today, there's always, the next component down the road that'll pop up, and then I get to learn something else about the plumbing industry, which I tell you, it sometimes it can surprise you. It's definitely like a box of chocolates.
Well, and I know you, touched on it earlier, kind of in your introduction at the beginning of the podcast, but you talked about the most common causes of loss, right, to the components. Can you speak to that and kind of, I don't want to call it a top 5 by any means. Don't limit yourself if it's 7 or if it's 3, but, wear and tear or weather related. Can you kind of speak to some common causes of loss to these components?
Well, really, if we're thinking of just the non-destructive, which is our largest volume, the 3 things that typically they want results on is it is there a manufacturing defect here? Is there an installation here? Or is there abuse? Those three right there, that's probably the vast majority of when I'm writing a report that, and this evidence, it is what it is, right? At the end of the day, it basically speaks for itself. And the report, I try obviously my best and to make it in a very intelligible, flowing manner that then has, proper support, proper documentation. When someone comes along, 6 months later, a year later, sometimes if I had, David probably knows more about this than I do, but if I had to take a guess, my guess would be litigation processes. Typically it's about, if you get a complicated one, it could be about 2 years. And obviously when you're going out through this process that can easily take 2 years long, you want to make sure you got the right kind of documentation. And David hit on that too when he was talking about the loss logistics, the picking up the evidence, those things like chain of custody, a description of the evidence, that kind of stuff. When it comes down the road, and it won't be immediate. Trust me, it takes a little while for it to become important. But when you're down the road and you're in litigation, those things do become important, and that's why it's nice to be able to, when you're initially picking up the evidence, when you're initially doing the documentation, dot your I's and cross your T's and get it done then, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing associated with that, and it's really kind of because it's maybe an internal thing that of what people mean by abuse, and so a lot of times we'll kind of say abuse, but that's a pretty big bucket that we throw in. It's really any kind of external forces associated with that, outside of we'll say an installation issue. But it's, that could be anything from chemicals applied to it to, physical abuse or freezing or, various other things that can, impact that. And so that's, a little bit more, I guess, detail on what we mean by abuse.
Sure. Well, a final question for the both of you, if you have an example, but I was just kind of thinking about this, is 18 plus years of experience, right, at the component testing lab. There's got to be a handful of unique situations, I should say, or dare I say, I don't want to call it humorous by any means, but just one that you kind of still remember to this day of something coming through that you had an inspection on and you thought, well, that is certainly out of the norm. Adrian, do you have any that kind of come to mind over your years of experience?
Well, I can tell you, I've had some challenging ones. There's no doubt about that. There's ones that you're really spending your time, hitting the books, hitting the destructive study, the destructive test, and I really figure that one out. But as far as some entertaining ones, I mean, everybody always loves the ones about sewage. So at a time, this hits a good organization which I support and I always appreciate, and that's the CPSC. Consumer Product Safety Commission, and those guys, they really, they kind of try to keep a track. They're very similar checks and balances. And when they had a toilet manufacturer that had issues associated with a pressurized tank inside of the toilet that they just didn't quite get quite right, as you can imagine, just the thoughts that go through my head. Obviously, I'm hoping I'm not in that bathroom when it happens, but exploding toilets, I think, is always very, very eye-opening whenever you see something like that.
Sure. David, how about you?
So, Adrian, you just made me think of something that I found somewhat humorous. So I was working on a case in which there was a carbon monoxide case. And so we had a joint study with the manufacturer, and since it was carbon monoxide, there was a safety issue. So Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the attorney that we were working for notified the Consumer Product Safety Commission that we were having this joint inspection. So we go to have the joint inspection, and this guy randomly shows up at the front door, and he flashes a badge. Is like, "I'm with the Consumer Product Safety Commission. I'm going to come in and witness your inspection." Like he was with the FBI or, something like that, like you see in the movies. And I kind of made me laugh. I'm like, "Are you for real?" And I said, "Can I see that?" And I was like, going to check out his ID and see. I was like, "Seems legit." I was like, "Well, maybe let me make a phone call." And I was like, "Come on, let's go." And so he was there, and he was there throughout the whole inspection. And the thing that it made happen is a lot of times the experts, there's experts and attorneys there for the other parties. They were much more vocal during the inspections because they wanted to make sure that they tried to sell their case to the Consumer Product Safety Commission that while they were there, so that there wasn't some bigger, investigation that went on to like all their products. But it was a unique, time and experience that happened. That the local official from Consumer Product Safety Commission just randomly, showed up to an inspection. So it was interesting. But he kind of caught me by surprise. I was like, checking it, but they have official badges and IDs and all that sort of thing.
And please tell me he was in a long trench coat with a thick mustache and aviator sunglasses.
Yeah, aviator glasses.
That's what I'm picturing.
I don't think he had aviator glasses on. He might have had a mustache, but okay. He was wearing like, the black suit and all that. It was
sure.
It was fun.
Well, awesome information today, guys. And obviously a big thanks again to the both of you for being here and shining some light on what subrogation entails and how plumbing failures are handled with respect to that. And thanks to everyone listening today. Just make sure to be looking out for our next mini episode where we're going to actually dive into more detail about the product inspection process from start to finish. And also don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to make sure you never miss an episode. And of course, if you have any property claims that need assessments, head on over to our website, alpineintel.com, to submit an assignment or get more details about how our suite of services can bring you the answers you need to feel confident about your settlement decisions. You'll also find additional information and resources in our show notes. Thanks again for joining today, and we'll see you next time.